I'll be making a decision about that pretty soon. And in the interim, I'm spending a lot of time traveling the country, listening and learning and sharing a little bit about myself. Because I know if I go forward, I'm going to have to share my heart just as much as the ideas that I might have about how people can live a better life. We can fix a few big complicated things, and certainly telling the leadership story, which I think is really important for our country's future. It's not just about the speeches and kind of talking about things that matters. It's developing strategies to fix the big complex things that right now are holding us back. But first and foremost, I have to share my heart. I have to share kind of my life story. It's not the one it's a little different than my brothers. Marvin and Neil are different than me. It's a little different than my dad's. After all, he's almost 91 years old. I've never jumped out of a plane. It's a little different than my mother's because every life is different than my mother's. And so, I was born in Midland, Texas, and I woke up and there she was, this extraordinary woman. She's my mom. Talking about a blessing from God. If you had a magic wand and wish that everybody, if you had one wish to make sure that people could live a life of purpose and meaning, it would be to have a mom and a dad like mine. I'm totally blessed in that regard and proud of them and proud of my brother, but I know I need to share a little bit about my life story, so here goes. My life really began in earnest when I was 17 years old. I met this beautiful young woman named Columba Garnica de Gallo. She was in León, Mexico. It was a Sunday afternoon, almost like they've been doing for centuries in colonial times in Spain, where after Mass, women would walk with a chaperone clockwise and men would walk counterclockwise, and that's how they found their husbands and wives. It wasn't quite like that because she was in a car, in the back seat of a car, and I was in the town square, and I met her, just my eyes met her, and I fell in love. Literally love at first sight. Head over heels in love. Most of the guys in the crowd are thinking, nah, no way. I promise you. I lost 20 pounds. I couldn't sleep. I just was transformed by this beautiful woman. She didn't fall in love with me at first sight. It was a little frustrating, but I developed more persuasive skills, and eventually she said, yes, I want to be your soulmate, and we've been married 41 years, and she has given me a purpose in my life that is pretty meaningful. I got out of the University of Texas with a surprise, a degree in Latin American affairs.
That's awesome.
In 2 years. A little over 2 years. I've worked my entire adult life, never taking more than a week off. And my wife is really the person that gets credit for this, because it has given me just this purpose to move forward. We have 3 kids. Jeb Jr. is my former partner, and he's given me a beautiful daughter-in-law, Sandra, and 2 great granddaughters. Georgia Helena Walker Bush is my oldest grandchild. We call her 41. I have a daughter who is the love of my life, Noelle, that lives in Orlando. And George and Mandy live in Austin. My son George they have 2 grandchildren, 2 grandsons. Jack and Prescott. Jack is now about a month old. I think a lot about what the future looks like through the eyes of my grandchildren, like you all through the eyes of your children or grandchildren. And we're on an intersection here where we either fix these big complex things or in decline. We're either going to be in our ascendancy again, or we're just accepting kind of defeat. And I know the American way is not to accept defeat, and I'm optimistic that we can fix these things. And I'm inspired by the motivation, at least, of a grandfather that loves his grandchildren. By the way, for those that don't have grandchildren, they're as good as everybody says. Be patient. They happen, and they give you great joy. My son also, apart from being a statewide elected official in Texas with the highest vote percentage of any candidate last time around, was 62% of the vote as a Republican. He also volunteered at the age of 30 to be in the United States Navy as a naval intelligence officer in the Navy Reserves. And I'm proud of his service, not only as a public servant, but his service in the military. And he served in Afghanistan, and I'm proud of the service of the men and women, all men and women in the military that keep us free. And it is outrageous that we now have a Veterans Administration that does not respect the service that they gave. The scandals inside of that agency, the ineptitude of their work has to be changed. In fact, if you look at government in general, and you're in the private sector, or you've had a chance to serve in state government, you say, what is going on in Washington? It is just completely corrupt and messed up. And so, motivated by a lot of reasons, I think we can fix these things. I got to do something that some people in this room have done, which is sign the front side of a paycheck. That's deeply discounted in politics today. For some reason, that doesn't seem to matter. Well, it matters a lot. Signing the front side of a paycheck means that you know what it's like to take risks. You know what it's like when you have, crazy regulations on top of every aspect of your business. You know the challenges that exist because sometimes life, we have ups and downs. We built from 3 people the largest full-service commercial real estate company in South Florida. Of all the experiences I've had in my 62 years of life, this one perhaps is the most important. It's believing that if we create the field of dreams, unencumbered without massive taxation and complex rules on top of every aspect of human behavior, you're going to create more prosperity and more opportunity than all of the creative government programs derived in Washington, D.C. It honestly works. The free enterprise system, done right, creates rising income for the middle. We're in the 6th year of a recovery, and median income is lower today than at the start of the recovery. Family income is down by $2,100 since the start of the recovery. We've never had anything like this. Workforce participation is lower than it was in 1980. Business startup rates are lower than business failure rates. This isn't because we've lost the animal spirits in our country. People are still dynamic. Young people, particularly when I meet them, they want to be able to pursue their dreams in all their unique ways. But we've created so much complexity on the next generation of people pursuing their activities in business that it's harder and harder for them to even start. And my experience in business makes me believe that if we fix these things, great things can happen. I got to do that as governor. I took these practical business experiences and did, what I said I was going to do as a candidate. I cut taxes every year totaling $19 billion, and to remind you all, we're one of the other states that doesn't have an income tax. We reduced the government workforce by 13,000, but I think our services were better, and most Floridians agree with that. We didn't say it's all about the size and scope of government, it's about the quality of the services that were provided. We challenged every aspect of our business climate. We brought budget discipline into the budget. In fact, I was called a lot of things, some of which I can't repeat here because they're like big boom microphones and it'll make national news. But the one thing that they called me in Tallahassee that I really liked a lot, and I repeat over and over again, they called me Vito Corleone. Because I vetoed 2,500 separate line items during my 8 years, totaling $2 billion. That's what we should be doing, is restricting government so that personal income can grow. The mantra in Tallahassee was, personal income will grow faster than government income. And it did. It grew by 4.5% during my time. Government income grew by a little over 2%. So we reduced the government, we reduced the size and proportionality of government based on the personal income of the state, and we ended up creating 1.3 million net new jobs. Now, Florida's a big state, I get that, but that's the most of any state for 5 out of the 8 years. More than Texas during my 8 years. Don't tell Rick Perry if he comes around, or don't tell my brother for that matter. We're pretty competitive in the Bush family. Because we built a better business climate. Imagine what Washington would look like with the kind of leadership that I provided in Florida and other conservatives have provided in other parts of the country. Where we reduce the size of government, we make it more effective. Instead of raising taxes as the solution to life's problems, as President Obama's done with a $1 trillion tax increase to fund Obamacare, and then another $600 billion over 10 years because he could, basically, that's not the best approach. The best approach is to create high sustained economic growth, where more people have a chance at earned success. That's what we did in Florida. We limited government, but yet 1.3 million net new jobs were created. And I did something that I'm really proud about that has nothing to do with Washington. In fact, let me just give you a precursor here. I don't believe that education, the federal government should have any say in education. This is really a local and state issue. But the simple fact is that many states just languish because they don't have principle-centered leadership to challenge the fact that government-run, politicized, unionized monopolies is not the best organizational model on top of our children. When the economic interests of the adults always come first, children suffer. 30% of our children in this great country of ours end up, after we spend more per student than any country in the world other than 2 or 3 tiny countries, or 30% are college or career ready. Where are the marches in the streets? Who's marching on behalf of these kids? Unless we think that some kids can learn and some kids can't, that kids in poverty can't learn, that kids that are languishing in broken homes don't matter, that they can't learn, I just reject that out of hand. Because I saw it firsthand what happens when you change the direction of a child's life because you change the education system. In Florida, we grade schools A, B, C, D, and F. There's no vagaries. It's totally transparent. 100% based on student learning. And the D and F schools, guess what? They went to B and A schools pretty quick because we rewarded improvement and people didn't want to be associated with a D or F school. We created the first statewide voucher program that was ruled unconstitutional, but it was a catalyst to improve all schools. And we replaced that one with the largest corporate tax scholarship program in the United States. Now 70,000 students attending private schools because of our tax scholarship program. Does anybody in this room have a child with a learning disability or a loved one with a learning disability? In my family, we've had that. In Florida, you can take, because of the federal law, your family member has an IEP, an individualized education plan. In Florida, if you don't like the quality of education, if the IEP is not being met, you can take the state and local dollars, dollar for dollar, and go to a private school. And the net result is, kids with learning disabilities, by the way, lead the nation in Florida in terms of their learning gains, because when you put pressure on monopolies, they respond. All schools get better when you have school choice. We ended social promotion in 3rd grade, this insidious idea that functionally illiterate kids can graduate from 3rd grade and go to 4th grade as though there's not going to be a consequence in their lives. All I'm saying is this: when you have a chance to lead, you can either talk about it, and we got a lot of talkers, or you can do something about it. I had a chance to serve in an era, perhaps, in a state, perhaps, where leadership was rewarded, where we did accomplish great things. Florida now leads the nation in terms of the learning gains of its students. We're one of the few states that has narrowed the achievement gap based on race or income. And just to remind you, and we went from 29th out of 31 on the 4th grade nation's report card to 6th out of 50 in 10 years' time. Because I was all in. I never let up. I fought these people all the way through, whether it's the bureaucrats or the teachers union, and that's what we need in Washington, D.C. Put aside whether it's education. It could be healthcare. It could be transportation. It could be the EPA. It could be a whole range of things. But what we now need are leaders that will solve problems, not only domestically, but abroad as well. This is the first president in the post-World War II era that believes America's presence in the world and America's leadership in the world is not a force for good. He may have good motives. I've learned never to ascribe bad motives to anybody that I disagree with. It's totally irrelevant, to be honest with you. But he's wrong. Over and over and over again, America's presence and leadership has created a more secure and peaceful world, not only for us, but for the rest of the world. The next President of the United States needs to re-engage with the world. We need to rebuild the alliances, the friendships. We need to fortify the military to maintain its strength. We need to make sure that the counterintelligence capabilities of this country are second to none. We need to make sure that the Patriot Act is renewed so that the threats on the homeland are protected. All of these things can be done, but it's going to require leadership. Name one country in the world where our relationship is better today than it was the day Barack Obama got elected.
Cuba.
I'm thinking of another. That was normally the second one. You all are too quick. You're so smart in New Hampshire. Cuba's definitely one, and the other is Iran. Yet Canada, we have a ruptured relationship right now. Mexico, they wonder where we are. Egypt, Al-Sisi is one of the stronger leaders to fight back against Islamic terrorism, and we've lost some ground there. Israel, the most important relationship we have in the Middle East, that relationship has been ruptured as well. Europe wonders where the United States is because we've told them that we're pivoting to Asia, and the Asian countries wonder where the pivot is. All across the world, the United States no longer is a place where you can take it to the bank. And because of that, we're living in a more uncertain world. Not just because of the asymmetric threats of these Islamic terrorists, but also nation states like Russia and China now seeing that they can exert their will on their neighborhood. Restoring America's presence in the world in a thoughtful way, and then focusing on how do you create high sustained economic growth where more people have a chance at earned success has to be the mission of the next President of the United States. And should I go forward and become a candidate, that's what I'll be talking about. How do we lift our spirits by fixing these things? Because my personal belief is that you and I hope you believe this, let me hold your hand. I honestly believe that this is the greatest time to be alive. And I honestly believe that if we fix these things, you and I could go back being 18 years old. And it'd be better to be 18 than the ages that we are. As long as I could go back with my beloved wife, because I think I would have to start my journey with her. You can come along too. That this is an extraordinary time. We're going to cure diseases. We're going to have technology that will defy our imagination. We'll be able to solve the problems that seem intractable right now because of American technology, American innovation, and the American spirit that is not dead. It's worth fighting for, and I hope that you'll join the cause. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So here you're open to take some questions?
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on what you've been doing in your time since governor and now, and maybe if there are any significant accomplishments in that time?
Sure. I set up a foundation that is the leading foundation in the United States for education reform, called the Foundation for Excellence in Education. It has, probably 50 employees. Condi Rice replaced me, which was a major upgrade as the chairman. We work state by state, because that's where the action is in terms of reform. In fact, we were involved in the corporate tax scholarship reform. We worked with conservative state-based think tanks. We work with governors when they're around to help. In this case, we didn't have a governor to help, but we had the state legislature and business groups. We build coalitions and help them understand how to craft law, because most of the things that reform-minded legislatures are looking at, we've already done. And so we've become kind of the Florida model has become the standard. So Alabama this year did, Mississippi did their first McKay Scholarship program for learning disabled kids. I went to the bill signing. It was really moving. Other states, Nevada's looking at an ESA, an education savings account, which is another form of vouchers. Other states are beginning. Alabama was one of the last states to do charter schools. So we work with states, state by state, to try to help them get to the right place to reform their schools. I was the chairman of the National Constitution Center, which I'm now no longer. And you know, I've always loved the Constitution, kind of generically. Everybody, how could you not like the Constitution? But I fell in love with it when I was the chairman because it reminded me of the genius of our founders. And it reminds me, actually, that we need to teach people about the founding of our country and respect it and cherish it and celebrate it, because it is truly unique. We're the only country that I'm aware of in the world where we have a Bill of Rights to protect us from our own government that assumes that we're a self-governing people and that our freedoms from government are really the defining element of who we are. Most constitutions are, I'll guarantee you this, I'll guarantee you that. It's a false hope. It never is delivered upon, because you can't do that through government. But you can create a society of free people that govern themselves better, and that's what's created the genius of our country. So I helped promote the National Constitution Center. I've had a business, investing business and a consulting business over the last few years with my son, and so I've had a full and active life. I've traveled. I never went to the People's Republic of China. For a while there was that. I'm not big on communism. I'm a no on on communism, and so it just took me a while. I just didn't feel the need. A lot of people always, wanted to go there. It's this emerging country. But in 2007, I started going 3 or 4 times a year to learn about it, because it is one of the great challenges for our country, and it's probably the most important relationship to get right over the next decade of time. As it emerges, there'll be big conflicts, and we need to challenge them where appropriate. Cybersecurity, on military action, on other things. We need to support our allies in the region, for sure. But we also need to make sure that we don't get into trade wars, and so developing a better understanding of how they think and helping them understand how we think is part of this as well. So I've spent a lot of time in business overseas, and I've learned a lot. I mean, someone told me I think I've traveled I've made 70 trips overseas in the last 6 or 7 years. I'm not bragging, because that ages you a little bit, but I've learned a lot in the process, for sure. Yep.
Governor, you mentioned that there are a lot of major issues that we need to address as a nation on our horizon. And as a young person, I'm really concerned about our fiscal issues, so the fiscal standing of our nation. I wonder if you could shed some light on what you might make a priority in, say, your first budget, if you run and then if you win as president.
Well, the first priority is to create high sustained growth, because 2% growth is going to the demands on government are going to overwhelm us. It's just not a sustainable business model when you see the emerging demographic trends of our country. 10 years from now, we're all going to be 10 years older. Hold your hand again. I need it. So we're all going to grow. Our demographic pyramid is looking like this, and that's where the demands on government are going to grow. Our entitlement programs are going to overwhelm us. So at 2% growth, they will. 4% growth gives us a chance to rebalance the size of government relative to our income. And that's got to be the first step. But secondly, you have to shift power back to the states. We have to deal with a lot of the inefficiencies of government. And at the same time, I think we need to fix entitlements. They're not sustainable. If you want to fix entitlements, we need to start working on it today, not to take away the benefits that people have already earned, but for phasing in a different system over an extended period of time to sustain it. And the previous administration, when my brother was president, was tried, and there wasn't enough support amongst Republicans or Democrats for that. We have to do this. We have to do this. I would add, by the way, one of the reasons why I'm a passionate supporter for fixing a broken immigration system is this reason, that if you want to fix our demographic pyramid that's looking like this, where the people that are receiving benefits are getting larger and larger in proportion to those that are going to pay for it, I'm looking at the younger guys here in the school, then you have to also allow for young dynamic people to come in that aren't a drain on our society, but could make an economic contribution. One of the suggestions would be narrow family petitioning, that is the driver of most legal immigration, and expanding economic immigrants. Take the Canadian model, because they have more economic immigrants coming into Canada than we do, and we're 10 times bigger as a population. So there are a lot of things that we need to do to create the kind of growth that will help us, but entitlement reforms have to be part of this as well. What do we do to grow? Fix this convoluted regulatory system that is just now creating massive uncertainty and confusion and costs that make it harder and harder for investment to take place in our country. Fix a convoluted tax code with massive, tax expenditures. We collect corporate and personal income tax about the same that we have in terms of tax expenditures. So the possibility of lowering rates dramatically and eliminating loopholes is part of a way to create tax equity, because wealthy people typically have lower effective tax rates because they take more advantage of these tax expenditures, and create a massive increase in investment in our own country. Last Monday morning, almost every Monday morning in the newspapers, there is an announcement of a business that has been bought by a smaller foreign company buying a larger U.S. company to relocate its headquarters overseas, so they don't have to pay the double taxation of worldwide income. We lose the corporate taxes, but more importantly, we're losing the high-wage jobs on doing this. So fixing the tax code, fixing the immigration system, embracing the energy revolution, and then fixing the fiscal structural deficit we have, I think we have to do this. And why we haven't had, why it hadn't happened yet, apart from the fact the guy in the White House doesn't think that high growth really is important, it's more redistribution that's kind of the issue. Debt service is lower today than it was 12 years ago. How could it be? We have 250% increase in the debt, but debt service is lower. Well, our monetary policy is the reason. It's created a bubble for those that own assets. They're doing great. Savers are just totally wiped out. My peeps back home in Florida that thought they could retire on their savings, not anymore. And working people that rely on businesses to be started up are being hurt because access to capital, given the regulatory climate, makes it harder and harder to do it. So big governments and big corporates love low interest rates, but the people that create the lifeblood of our economy aren't doing well because of it. And so when rates go up, we're going to have a calamity because immediately, since we have these maturities of these loans aren't long term, we're going to have to start renewing it at higher rates, and debt service will explode, and it's going to crowd out all the other things we need to do. The only place I can think of to expand spending would be in the military. I applaud the Republicans committed to rebuilding the military in this budget year. The sequesters have been devastating. We're moving towards the smallest Army, Navy, Air Force, and at a time of real danger, having a strong military that's capable, that's well-funded, well-trained, with the best equipment is essential for not using it. This is the notion that somehow people have forgotten. I mean, we got to this place of dominance because of peace through strength. The Soviet Union fell without bloodshed thanks to great leadership of Ronald Reagan and the guy that succeeded him. I'm joking. There are things that we could do to create a more peaceful world, but it'll just be lofty rhetoric unless we have a strong military. Skip.
So if you decide to run, comparing yourself to your father and your brother going to be inevitable. What similarities or differences would you say you have to your brother?
I'm much better looking than my brother. But you can tell he's smarter. I don't know. Look, first of all, let's just be clear. The difference between 1988 and 2000 and 2016 is more than day and night. The world has changed dramatically. You need to learn from the lessons of all presidents. I happen to have two family members that happen to be presidents, but part of leadership is learning from the lessons of the past so that you don't repeat it. I mean, have you ever read The March of Follies by Barbara Tuchman? The great American historian, one of the great historians that didn't have a PhD, which I loved even more. Read the book because it's really interesting how history has this confounding way of repeating itself over and over and over again since the beginning of time, Trojan War all the way to now. And so part of being a good leader is to learn from the lessons of the past. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time saying what I do differently than what they did. I just don't see how that's particularly relevant. I think I'll talk a lot more about the things that I think Barack Obama's done that hasn't worked, because that's the here and now. And we need to learn from those lessons and adjust our policies before it's too late. But I'm different. Look, I'm different. I grew up differently. We have some things in common, but like a lot of families, we're different in many ways. My record in Florida is one that's very different. My life experience compared to my dad pales by comparison. And by the way, it pales by comparison to anybody in this room. He's the greatest man I've ever met. There's no way for me to say anything other than the fact that I adore him, I idolize him. And it's going to take a lot more prying to get me to say anything bad about him. Well, we'll take it outside.
Governor, I think your father's one of the most wonderful people I know too. But I do have a question. We've lost 8 million families have lost their homes to foreclosure, and this administration is yet to address the housing finance system supporting $11 trillion in mortgages and remain in conservatorship. Would that be a priority for you?
I think the system that we have needs to be reformed for sure, because we're recreating the bubble again. Put aside the suffering that people have gone through through no fault of their own, having a big decline in values. I worry as much about the people that have lost their homes as the people that lost value in their homes. Because for every house that has been foreclosed in a neighborhood, there are 10 people that have seen their values drop by, now hopefully they've come up a little bit, but they've seen their home values drop by 30, 40% in my home state. And they keep making their mortgage payments, and they see their neighbors that had stopped for whatever reason. So it's a broader issue than, it's an issue of equity as well. I think Freddie and Fannie need to be reformed. And I think that we ought to move towards, away from first dollar risk for the government, towards phasing that out and moving towards last dollar risk for the government, where people have skin in the game. So instead of just servicing mortgages, which is now effectively what's done, these large companies service the mortgages, they sell them off to the government, or quasi-government, whatever you want to call Freddie and Fannie, and the underwriting criteria are getting recreated by government again, 3% down, you know, changing the credit scores and all this. There's got to be a better balance than where we are right now, because we're recreating the same bubble that got us in the mess beforehand. And the minute we start getting interest rates to go back up again, this is the place where this will play out, because the great majority of these loans are adjustable rate mortgages. That is the bigger issue. I don't think we'll ever get back to the 30-year fixed rate mortgage being kind of a God-given right in America. It exists for some, but I just don't see that necessarily, and the social mores and the cultural values of young people really are kind of moving away from that anyway. So reforming Freddie and Fannie to lessen the contingent liability that exists for the federal government is really got to be a huge priority. The deficits are clear. I mean, they're big, and they're, you know, we're celebrating a $400+ billion deficit because it's only 2% of GDP or something like that. It seems big to me. I mean, when we had to, you know, we balanced our budget every year and ended up with $10 billion of reserves. There's a lot of money. This is, you know, it's not walking around money. This is a slug of dough that we're going to have to pay back. But if you add up the contingent debt that the United States government has now acquired through housing, through the student loan program, $1.2 trillion. It's almost doubled in size in the last 6 years. An explosion of debt on the backs of recourse debt on the backs of young people. And then you take the contingent liabilities of Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, SSI disability. It's in the 50, 60 trillion dollars. Now we're a big, prosperous country, but those burdens are not, if we allow that to exist, if we don't recast these liabilities in a way from the, you know, over time to get out from this mess, that's not sustainable. Our children and grandchildren will be paying off for all of the largesse that we allowed to happen.
Hi, this is New Hampshire, live free or die, as you know.
Yeah.
I wonder what you would say, Governor,
That's
to
slogan.
the kind folk in New Hampshire about Common Core. And just to be clear, I am a teacher. Several of my students and former students are here tonight, too.
So, I should ask you what you think Common Core is, because you're a teacher, so you know. Because it's misunderstood by a lot of
I
people.
understand.
I'm for higher standards, assessed faithfully, with robust accountability around it, and school choice pushing the system so we get higher student learning. That's the lesson of Florida, and I'm not backing down. I'm for higher standards, and I'm for the federal government having no say in the creation of content or curriculum or standards, which was what Common Core is about. It's not about anything else other than our expectations. What are the set standards that need to be met to make sure that more than a third of our kids are college or career ready? That's what I'm for. And you know, because people have a different view of what Common Core is, am I supposed to back away from something that I know works? Because I've seen it. I just gave you the Florida story. It's really nationally leading. We were 50th in the country in graduation rate. We had an 8th grade level exit test. I went to a school campaign. I went to 250 schools actually. I may have seen you in Florida. I don't know. I went to 250 schools when I ran in 1998, and I went to a remedial class where a high school senior needed to pass an 8th grade level test to get a piece of paper that said he was a high school graduate. And the question that he was struggling with was, a baseball game starts at 3, ends at 4:30. How long is the game?
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
that was exactly, well, I didn't say out loud because I didn't want to hurt the guy's feelings, but it just broke my heart. So standards matter. Expectations matter a lot. Whether they're common or not is not nearly as important as that they are high, and that if you assess to them accurately, that means that someone actually, instead of just getting a piece of paper, which this kid sadly didn't, that it means that they're ready to go to college or ready to take on a job. We had a 50% graduation rate when I became governor, lowest in the country, and it's improved every year because we raised expectations, we had accountability, we had school choice, we focused on early childhood literacy. We hit every possible thing that was necessary to improve learning. And we're one of the only states that has narrowed the achievement gap based on income and race. And so, look, how do you translate this into a possible presidential run? I think you got to share the fact that leadership matters. You don't back away from, it's been easier just to kind of find a way to accommodate the unions. But the unions can't be accommodated on this. It isn't their job, the unions. It's teachers' jobs, and they do a fantastic job of teaching teaching so students can learn. But unions are not organized unless, as Al Shanker said, the head of one of the teachers' unions, national teachers' unions a while back, when they start paying union dues, I'll start representing them. He was talking about kids. Who's going to be on behalf of the kids? Who's going to support young people to assure that their dreams are going to be shattered? And so I'm all in on this, and a lot of people who implemented these same standards in other parts of the country seemed like they just kind of run away from it. Fine, they have their reasons, I have mine. I'd rather be on the side of people that believe that we can fix this system. No amount of tax policy or regulatory policy or immigration, all these things that we can fix and are necessary to fix will solve this problem of the haves and have-nots unless we really change how we educate our kids. We're moving to a world, and it's here. Look at your business. You're not going to hire anybody unless they have probably an AA or a college degree, no matter where they start. And yet, we have a third of our kids that aren't even high school ready when they graduate. They're certainly not college ready. They're taking high school reading and high school math at the community college. It's not going to work unless we dramatically change the path we're on. So I encourage people in the education community to be bigger and bolder and fight as hard as we can with a sense of urgency about this.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
One or two more?
As long as you talk about education, I'd be curious what you think of the German model where some children, not everybody goes to college, and one could question the value, getting shot by somebody, of liberal arts education at the college level versus, things that actually can get you a job that pays good and helps advance the country.
Put aside the value of an anthropology major. I have a friend who's a governor that talked about we have too many anthropology degrees, and he just was roadkill afterwards. So the liberal arts, I think people ought to have the choice to pick which that they want. But career readiness is as important as college readiness. And frankly, through high school, at a minimum, the skills required to go to college are the same skills required to get a career. The German model is a little different in that it tracks at an earlier age. We don't have to apply that model, but I do think we need to be much more career focused. They do an extraordinary job in that regard. It's just that as we move into this world of accelerating technology and disruptive innovation, people even that aspire to a career have to be able to read the manuals that are a lot more complex. So if you look at the text of manuals for electricians, welders, any of the jobs that actually pay extraordinarily well, whereas some four-year degrees don't pay anything because no one can get a job, the skills are above 12th grade level reading, and certainly higher as it relates to math. So I don't think we have to change. What we need to do is raise expectations across the board and then give options, particularly in the high school level, for technical skills. And some states are doing this better than others. I would say Florida is not a leader in this regard, although under the leadership of Rick Scott, there's moves to try to make it so. And I know that the states that are really focused on this have seen pretty good results as it relates to having people be qualified to get jobs where there's, look, there are 3 million jobs unfilled that require skills that don't exist in our country at the time of deep pessimism. 60% of Americans think we're in a recession, and we're in the 6th year of recovery. Well, it's because they are in a recession. So the opportunities to be able to fill these jobs, I think there's a desire to do it, but if you don't have the skills matched up, it's pretty hard to make it real.
So Governor, you've done an excellent job of turning the weather in this house into Florida.
I feel like home. A little more humidity, please.
So I guess what I'll do is ask you one final question, because I know there's still some folks who'd like to meet you. And before you dive into the scrum, thank you again for spending this time with us. Just another night in New Hampshire, but for you, I know this and the question
That's
is,
so true.
So the president this week in a speech described climate change as, I quote, an immediate national security threat to the United States. And this is a week when we've had very disturbing news out of Vermont. And I just wanted to, leadership, as you've said, is about priorities. So share with us some of your priorities. Should you run, should you win in day one, that would be reflected in particular from a national security.
Well, look, first of all, the climate is changing. I don't think the science is clear of what percentage is man-made and what percentage is natural. I just don't. It's convoluted. And for the people to say the science is decided on this is just really arrogant, to be honest with you. It's this intellectual arrogance that now you can't have a conversation about it even. The climate is changing. We need to adapt to that reality. And I think as part of a small part in terms of prioritization of our foreign policy, we need to encourage the states, the countries that have had an increase in carbon emissions. We're not one of them. We've had a decrease, a pretty significant decrease, and it'll continue on, not because of Barack Obama, but because of the energy revolution, because of free enterprise, because of private property rights, because of American innovation, has created a combination of two existing technologies, hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling, has created an explosion of lower carbon energy that now is being used to replace higher carbon energy. And the net result is the United States, because of conservation, which I totally believe is an important part of this, gas mileage in cars has gone up and all that, but also the shift towards natural gas, where we've reduced our carbon emissions in spite of the efforts of this administration to try to destroy the good news coming out of the oil patch. I mean, it's awfully ironic. If the president thinks this is the gravest threat to our national security, it seems like he would say, let's expand LNG as fast as we can to get it into the hands of higher carbon intense economies like China and other places. Let's figure out ways to use compressed natural gas for replacing imported diesel fuel that has a higher carbon footprint. There's all sorts of things that he could do to celebrate this extraordinary American success story that is truly American. Look at the other places that have tried to benefit from this. No other country comes close to it because we have private property rights in the trading of mineral rights, which accelerates and makes us more dynamic. A Greek immigrant was the one, through trial and error in a private business, was the one that came up with this explosion, and now the rapid change of innovation is making it more and more extraordinary. It's a win for the environment, and it's a win for economic activity, and that's the intersection we need to get into. The president's approach is effectively reduce economic activity to lower our carbon footprint, because that's not what he says, of course, but that's the net result of his policies. And higher costs particularly for low-income people. Now he'll probably say, well, we need another subsidy to overcome that, and that's how we go. We increase the cost for people, then we say it's not fair that they have to pay that, rather than say, let's find the lowest cost energy sources to be able to allow people to get the best deal they got. Your utility bills, well, New Hampshire is a little difficult, but in other places, utility bills have gone down because of the use of natural gas. In the gas at the pump has gone down because of the same phenomena, and it's a win. So I don't think it's the highest priority. I don't think we should ignore it either. I think that's one thing. I think just generally, I think as conservatives, we should embrace innovation. embrace technology, embrace science. It's the source of a lot more solutions than any government-imposed idea. And sometimes I sense that we pull back from the embrace of these things. We shouldn't. We're the party that should be the party of discovery, the party of science, the party of innovation, and tear down the barriers so that those things can accelerate in our lives to find solutions for all these things. They're not going to be found in Washington.
And with that, thank you again.
Thank
And
you
I'd
all.
like to-